Hey folks, in this episode I'm going to show you how to make this procedural fire shader in Blender. This shader works as a surface shader, so you can apply the material to the surface of an object. It also works as a volumetric shader as well. It should be good for both eevee and cycles. So without further ado, let's get to it. I'll take my cursor to the bottom left hand corner down here until I see a crosshair. I'll then left click and drag and open up a new window. I'm going to change this window to the shader editor. I'll hit N to close the N panel. In my 3D viewport I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'm going to select all the vertices. I'm going to hit SX2 and that will scale it on the X-axis by 2. I'll then tab out of edit mode. If your default cube hasn't got material already, click new in your shader editor and we'll rename this material to Procedural Fire Shader. I'll then navigate to my outliner and I'm going to rename this object to Procedural Fire Shader Cube. So I'll set my render engine to eevee. I'll navigate to where it says volumes. I'll expand those options. I'll keep the resolution to 1/4 and that's just for viewport performance while we work. For the final render we can change this to 1/1. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to delete the principal BSDF. I'll then hit Shift A, search for shader, and we go to principal volume. I'll then plug the principal volume into the volume of the material output. I'm going to change the density to 0 and I'm going to change the color to white. Maybe I can increase the shader editor window so we can see what we're doing a bit better. I'll hit Shift A, go to texture, and we're going to choose noise texture. I'm going to set this to 4D. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate and I'll pop that down there. For this first noise texture, I'm going to set the scale to 2. I'm going to set the detail to 15, which is maximum. I keep the roughness at 0.5, but maybe I can change the distortion to 1. For the second noise texture, I'm going to set the scale to 4, the detail to 15, and the distortion to 1. Before we go any further, let's just enable the Node Wrangler. So go to Edit, Preferences, and under Add-ons, type in Node, and then enable the Node Wrangler here, and then click this button and Save Preferences. So with this noise texture selected, I'm going to hit Control T, and that will add a texture coordinate and a mapping node. I'll then hit G, just drag this over to here for now. I'm going to zoom into the mapping node. And for the scale on X and Y, I'm going to type in 2, and for the scale on the Z, I'm going to type in 0.5, and we're going to be using the generated coordinates for this one. I'll then plug the vector from this mapping node into this noise texture down here. I'll hold down Shift, right click and drag, and that'll add a noodle point. I'll just hit G, I'm going to line that up to there, hit Shift, right click and drag again, add another noodle point. I'll hit G, I'll just drag this down to round about there. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go to colour and we'll choose mix colour. I'll hit Shift D, we'll duplicate that mix colour and we'll pop that there. I'll change the mix type for this first mix colour to multiply. I'm going to drag the factor from this noise texture into socket A and the factor from this noise texture into socket B, and then I'll drag this factor on the mix colour node to 1. I'll then drag the result from this mix colour into the factor of this mix colour node. I'll drag the factor from this noise texture into socket B, and I'll drag the factor from this noise texture into socket A. Again, I'm going to hold down Shift, right click and drag. I hit G, just drag this across over to there, just so we can see where everything's going, and maybe I'll do the same for this noodle. So I'm going to hold down Shift, right click and drag. I hit G, we'll just drag this down to round about there. In fact, I'm just going to neaten these up a little bit. I'm not really happy with the layout, so I'm going to box select all of these. I'll shift and box select these two control points. I'll shift select this noise texture. I'm going to hit G, Y, and just drag these down to round about there. And maybe I can add a controller on this noodle. So hold down Shift, right click and drag. I'm going to hit G, just bring it down to around about there. I'll then select this mix color. I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and left click so we can see what's happening on the surface. I'll then hit Shift A, go to Converter, we choose Color Ramp, and I'll pop that in between there. I'm going to select this first flag, and I'm going to click this button 5 times, which will add 5 flags. I'm going to drag this flag across. I'll drag these flags across. So this first flag we're going to keep set to black. This second flag we're going to set to white. This next flag we're going to set to black. This flag I'm going to set to white. This flag I'm going to set to like a dark grey, something around there. This flag I'm going to set to black. Maybe I'll drag these across, just shimmy them across a bit more. So you got something that looks similar to this. I'll hold down Control, right mouse button and drag, and that will disconnect that from the surface, and then I'll plug the colour from this colour ramp into the emission strength of the principal volume. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Converter, and I'm going to choose Math Node, and I'll pop that in between there. I'm going to set this to multiply, and I'll set a value strength of 10. Maybe we need to shimmy some of these flags on the colour ramp across. something around about there. So these are the basic flames, and we're actually going to be animating these on the Z component. But before we do that, we're going to need to make a mask to cut off the tops of the flames and then to randomize flame protrusions coming out of the top. That will consist of two components. So the first component will be a gradient texture. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to texture, and we'll choose gradient texture. I'll pop that there, we'll keep it set to linear, and with that gradient texture I'm going to hit Control T, and that will add a texture coordinate and a mapping node. I'll just drag this up to here, maybe I'll shimmy this up to here, and with the gradient texture selected I'm going to hit Control Shift left click, and that will add it to the surface so we can see what we're doing. So with the mapping node, we're going to rotate the gradient texture by 90 degrees. I'm also going to set the X location. I'm going to choose -0.1. Excellent. I'll then hit Shift A, go to converter, and we're going to choose color ramp. And with the color ramp selected, I'll then change it from linear to B-spline, and that will give us a smoother fall off. I'll then click this button here and we'll choose flip color ramp. Maybe I can drag this value across down to around about there. Maybe I can increase this white flag slightly. Now I want to add randomization to this gradient texture because fire doesn't cut off in a straight line. There's kind of undulations and whatnot. So in order to do that, I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to texture, and we're going to choose noise texture. I'll pop that above this mapping node. I'll then connect this to the vector of this mapping node here. So I'm going to grab a noodle from this mapping node and I'm going to plug it into the vector of this noise texture. I'll then hold down Shift, right click and drag. I'll then hit G. We'll just drag this up to around about there. I'm going to change this to 4D. Keep all the default settings for this noise texture. Now we need to mix it in with this gradient texture. So I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to color and we'll choose mix color. I'll plug the color ramp from the gradient texture into socket B, and I'll plug the factor from the noise texture into socket A. We're going to change the mix type from mix to linear light, and we'll give it a factor of 1. We'll also enable this clamp result. Hold down Control, Shift and left click the mix node. Now we can see what's happening. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go to converter, color ramp, and I'll pop that in between the noise texture and the mix color node. Again, we're going to flip this color ramp, so I'll click this arrow, click flip color ramp. I'll just drag these flags across, maybe something around there. I'll just drag this mix color node over to here just so we've got a nice neat node structure. I'll box select these three nodes. I'm going to hit G, drag them across. Now we need to mix this gradient cutoff mask in with the actual flames themselves. To do that, I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to color, we'll choose mix color. I'll pop that there. And for the flame textures down here, I'm going to plug this into socket B. I'll then plug the mix color from this linear light from the gradient textures into the mix factor. I'm going to set socket A to black. I'll just hit G, we'll just drag this over to here. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate that node. I'll plug the result into the factor and the color from this bottom color ramp into the bottom socket of the mix color node. I'll hold down Control, right click and drag, and we'll disconnect that from the surface. I'll then plug the result from this mix color node into the top socket of the multiply node, which goes into the emission strength. Now it's time to add a bit of color. Maybe I can just drag this first flag back a bit just to give us a bit more emission there, something around there. I'm going to box select these three nodes. I'm going to hit G, just drag them across over to around about there. Shift A, go to converter and choose color ramp, and then plug the result from this end mix color node into the factor of the color ramp, and we'll plug the color from the color ramp into the emission color socket on the principal volume. This first flag we're going to keep as black. Select this end flag and I'm going to hit the plus button 4 times. This first colour I'm going to set to kind of like a pale yellow, almost white, something around there. I'll drag this flag across. I'm going to set this to more of an orange tone. I'll then set this flag to a rich orange colour, something around about there. I'll then select this flag. I'm going to set this to another orange, but more in the red zone, to around about there. And finally, I'll set this one to red. Not 100% red, but near enough, around about there. Excellent. Maybe I can drag these flags across and we'll just manipulate these until we've got something that we like. Okay, I'm going to go with that temporarily. Under my render settings, I'm just going to go to my volume. I'm going to change the resolution from 1/4 to 1/1, just so I can see what I've got. Okay, excellent. It's looking good. I'm going to change it back to 1/4. Maybe I'll neaten these nodes up. Now, we need to animate this. So there's going to be a couple of components that we're going to be animating. So we're going to be animating all of the W factors on the noise textures, as well as we're going to be animating the Z component on this mapping node. For this mapping node on the Z location, I'm going to type in hash frame divide by -50. Now if I push play, you can see the flames are rising. If you want them to rise faster, you just reduce this number. So instead of having -50, I'd have -25. I'm going to keep mine set to -50 just for this tutorial. Now to animate these W factors here and here, Obviously the scale is different on these, so a fine movement on this one would have a slower movement, whereas a fine movement on this W factor would have a faster movement. So we need to compensate that with a bit of math. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Converter and choose Math Node. I'll then hit Shift D and duplicate that. And for this first math node, I'm going to set to multiply the top value. I'm going to set to 1, and I'm going to add a driver for this bottom value. So for this bottom value, I'm going to type in hashtag frame divide by 100. So now where this noise texture scale here is double the size as this one, we're going to have to divide this number by 2. So we'll select this math node and we're going to set it to divide, and we're going to divide it by 2. I'll then plug the value from this multiply node into the top socket of this math node. I'll then plug this value into the W factor on the bottom noise texture. I'll then plug the value straight from this math node into the W factor on this noise texture. And we need to plug it into this noise texture up here as well, onto the W factor. So maybe I'll just hit G, just drag this up, I'll zoom in, and I'll plug the value from the math node into the W factor on this noise texture. I'll just hit G, I'm going to bring it back down to round about there. So the scale on this noise texture is set to 5, which is double the size of this one. So I'm going to select this math node, set to divide, I'm going to hit Shift D, drag it up to around about there. I'll then hit G, we'll just drag it up so it's in line with that. Maybe I'll grab this texture coordinate and just bring this down a bit. Now we need to neaten this up because it looks terrible. So I'm going to hold down Shift, right click and drag, and that will add a control point. I'll then hit G, just bring this across to around about there. I'll then right click and drag these two noodles. I'll then hit G, we'll just drag this up to around about there, and one last time, right click and drag, hit G, we'll just drag this across over to here. And if we want these two in line perfectly, I'm going to box select all of these noodle control points. I'll then hit SX0. I'll then hit GX, just drag them across. Maybe we can do the same for these ones. So I'll box select these noodle points here. I'm going to hit SX0, GX. Now we've got the gradient mask, which is animated. We've got all the W factors, which are animated on the flames. And we've also got the location of the flames animated. So let's just see what that looks like. I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to hit play. Excellent. Maybe we can increase the fall off for the gradient texture. So I believe it should be this one. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, that's a volume object. I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Mesh, and I'm going to choose Icosphere. I'm going to open up the Icosphere options here, and I'm going to change the subdivisions to 4. I'll then right click, click Shade Smooth. I'll hit G, X, just drag this over to around about there, and then I'm going to apply that material, Procedural Fire Shader. And of course, if you go over to your render settings and you change your resolution to 1/1, you're going to get a much better resolution. For now, I'm just going to change my resolution to 1/4. This is for the volume shader, so maybe under the principal fire shader material, I'm going to name this one to Procedural Fire Shader Volumetric. I'm going to click this 2 button. Now it's a unique material, and I'll rename this one to Procedural Fire Shader Surface for a surface material. So the surface material, it's going to make a couple of tweaks. So I'm going to delete the principal volume. I'm going to delete this multiply node. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Shader and we'll choose Transparent. I'll then hit Shift A. We'll go to Shader and we'll choose Emission. I'm going to pop the emission below the Transparent. I'll just bring this material output over to here. I'll hit Shift A, go to Shader and we choose Mix Shader. So I'm going to plug the transparent into the top socket, the emission shader into the bottom socket. I'll plug the shader socket from the mix shader into the surface of the material output. I'll then plug the color from the color ramp into the color of the emission node. I'm going to set the strength to 4. I'll then take the result from this last mix color node and plug it into the factor of the mix shader. Maybe I'll grab that mix shader, hit G, just bring it up, just neaten these nodes up to something around about there. I'm just going to select this first shader in my outliner. I'm going to rename this object to Procedural Fire Shader Volume. I'll then click this button, enable all of these filters here. I'll then hide that from viewport and render. I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Mesh, Plane. I'll then hit RX90. I'll then hit S2, SX2. I'll then hit Control A and apply the scale. I'll click this button in my shader editor and I'm going to choose the Procedural Fire Shader Surface. If I push play, you're going to see it's not pointing in the right direction. So with that object selected, where we rotated it on the x-axis, I'm going to have to apply the rotation. So that's Control A and apply the rotation. Now if I hit play, you can see it's working as it should. I'll just hit numpad 1 to go into front view. And the only thing we have to do now is we go over to here, to this color ramp, and we're just going to drag this black flag to the left. Maybe we can drag this one across, drag this one across. You can even add a couple more flags, so something around about there. I'll just grab this icosphere and I'm going to type in 0 on the x-axis. Maybe I can drag it forward, so I'm going to hit numpad 3. I hit G, Y, hold down control, snap it to the grid. So around about there, I'll then grab this fire plane here. I hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll then hit G, Z, hold down control till the base is in line with the icosphere. Now I hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll just drag this down. I'm going to go into rendered view. I'll then go to my world settings over here. I'm going to set the world color to black and I'll set the strength to 0. Maybe I'll disable my overlays. I might even go to my render settings and right at the bottom under color management I'm going to change the view transform from AGX to filmic. I know it's not the best move for VFX or whatnot, but I'm happy with this result just for this tutorial, and for the look I'm going to choose medium high contrast. So before you continue, just go to file, choose save as, and I'm going to name my project Like and Subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. Then click save as. I'll then select the light in the outliner. I'm going to hit delete. I'll then select the icosphere. I'm going to hit numpad 1, numpad period, and that should center my 3D viewport. I'll then hit control alt numpad 0, and that will align the camera to the view. I'll then select my camera. I'm going to go to object data down here. I'm going to make sure the X location is set to 0. Maybe I can set the Z location to 0.5. I'll then drag it on the y-axis until I've got everything encompassed in the camera view. Maybe something around there. Maybe drag it up on the Z-axis. Okay, I think I need to change the contrast of these flames, so I'm just going to select one of these flame objects. I'm going to drag this black flag across to around about there. So if I go to my render settings, at the moment I've got it set in eevee. Again, I'd increase the volume resolution to like 1/1 or 1/2 if you're going to be using the volumetric fire shader. But if you're not using the volumetric aspect of this and you just want to use the surface material, then the volume doesn't really matter, so we can reduce that. If you want this to interact with a ground plane, so if I hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Mesh, I'll choose Plane, S4, I hit Enter, I then hit numpad 1 to go into front view, I hit G, Z, hold down control, snap it to the grid till it's touching the base of the icosphere. You can see it's interacting with the ground plane quite well. Maybe I'll add a material to that, so with the ground plane selected, I'm going to click New. Maybe I can turn the roughness down to 0.333, and I might change the metallic to 0.5, so we're getting some nice reflections there. And of course you can change it from eevee to cycles. Cycles will give a better result. Maybe I can grab my camera. I'm going to go to my object data over here. Maybe I'll just reduce it on the Z-axis so we can get some of that ground plane in the view. Maybe I'll drag it back on the Y-axis. I'll then go to my render settings, and under cycles I'm going to change a noise threshold of 0.025. I'll give a max sample count of, let's say, 128. Well, actually 64 should be absolutely fine. I'll then go down to light paths, disable reflective and refractive caustics, and that will decrease your render time. I'll just go into viewport shading. I'm going to go to my compositing tab over here. I'm going to enable use nodes. I'll then hit Control Shift left click, and that will add a viewer node. I'll just pop that down there, hold down Shift, right click and drag just to add a control point. Hit G, bring it over to there, and then maybe take this render layer over here. I'll then hit N. We'll go to view. I'm going to enable this backdrop option here, and we'll click fit. I'll then go back to my layout. I'll then hit F12 and just render out that frame. I'll close this window. I'm going to go to my compositor. Maybe I'll increase this window slightly. Click fit. I'll then click N to hide the N panel. I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to filter and we'll choose glare. I'm going to pop that in between the render layers and the composite. I'm going to change it from streaks to bloom. I'm going to reduce the size to maybe 5, and I'm going to take down the mix to, let's say, 0.5, maybe something around there. Maybe reduce it a bit more, maybe increase the size. So just play about with this until you got something that you like. Just a quick recap. I'll go back to layout. We've got 2 shaders. Let me just mute everything so we can kind of see what we're doing. So we've got this procedural fire surface shader, which is just using emission, and then if I mute that and unmute this one, and we've got this one which is the procedural fire shader using volumetrics. I do encourage you to maybe add some more flags into the mix and maybe another noise texture just to give you a bit more detail. Of course, for a bit of a stylized look, you can always go Shift A, we'll go to color and we'll choose hue saturation value, and we could pop that in between there, and then you can just change the hue so you got different color fire. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to hide the volume object, and I'm going to re-enable the surface materials. I'm going to go into rendered view. I'm going to go to my output tab over here. I'm going to click render region, so we're only rendering what's in the camera view. So you're going to have to choose a file location where you want to save your image sequence or your movie clip. click this folder here. I'm going to save mine in a folder called You Absolute Legends. Click accept. PNG should do for this. It's a lossless format. If you want more dynamic range, choose OpenEXR and choose the codec of DWAA lossy, and that will give you more dynamic range while keeping your file size low. And then hit Control S to save your project. Hey folks, this is me a couple of days later. So I wasn't quite happy with the end result. I've made some improvements to this and I'm going to show you that now. So with the icosphere selected, I'm going to hit Shift S and choose cursor to selected, so the cursor is centered to the icosphere. I'll then hit Shift A, go to mesh, and we're going to choose icosphere. We'll then expand the icosphere options here, and I'm going to change the subdivisions to 4. I'll collapse that. I'll then right click, I'll click shade smooth. I'm going to give the icosphere the same material as the floor plane, so I'll select that inner icosphere. I'll then click here and I'll choose ground material. I'll then select the fire icosphere object. I'm going to go over to my modifiers over here. I'll then click add modifier. We'll go to deform and we'll choose displace. I'll then click new. I'll click this button here and that will take us to the texture slot. We'll change it from image or movie to clouds. I'm going to set the size to 0.5 and I'll give a depth of 2. I'll then navigate back to my modifiers over here. We'll then change the coordinates from local to object. We're going to add that object now, so that's Shift A and we'll go to empty and I'm going to choose sphere. I'll then go over to the object data over here and under Z location I'm going to type in hash frame divide by 20. I'll then hit play just to see what we've got. Okay, excellent. I'll then select the icosphere with the flame material on, and the object will be that empty object. In fact, let's just rename the empty object to fire controller empty. I'll just increase this window. I'll then select the icosphere with the flames on, and if I hit play, you can see the movement of the empty object is deforming the icosphere. Maybe the strength's a bit too strong, so I'm going to turn the strength down to 0.75. Also, I'm going to add a vertex group, so I'm just going to go into my viewport shading. I hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm going to skip to frame 1. I'll navigate to my vertex data tab over here, and under vertex group, I'm going to click this plus button to add a vertex group. I'll tab into edit mode. I'll make sure all the vertices are selected, and with a weight of 1, I'm going to click assign. I'll then move my viewport till it's underneath, and I'm going to select this very bottom vertice here. I'll hit numpad 1. I'm going to hit Control plus 8 times. I'll then set a weight of 0.75. I'll click assign. I'll hit Control minus twice. I'll set a weight of 0.5. I'll click assign. I'll hit Control minus 2 more times. I'll set a weight of 0.25. I'll click assign. I'll hit Control minus once. I'll set the weight to 0 and I'll click assign. So now if I tab out of edit mode, I go back to my modifiers, and then I'll add that vertex group to the displacement modifier. I click group, and the base of this icosphere will have 0 displacement, and it will graduate up to full displacement. So if I hit play, you can see what's happening. It's a bit rough at the moment, so we'll smooth that out with a subdivision surface. So go to add modifier, we'll go to generate, and we'll choose subdivision surface. And I'll set that to level 2. I'm going to go into rendered view, 3 to go into side view, and I'm going to select that in an icosphere. I'm going to hit S, hold down Control to snap it to the grid, and we're just going to scale this up a bit. Let's go into viewport shading, and when you scale up, just ensure that it's not poking through the fire mesh. So I'm going to look around. Okay, I'm kind of happy with that. I'll then hit numpad 0 to go into camera view, go into viewport shading. Let's go into rendered view, see what we've got. Okay, you should already have your render settings and your file output set up from previously, so it's simply a case of hitting Control F12, and that will render out your image sequence. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, please click like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.